Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update. The goodness knows what one today. I think it's only the second Ukrainian one today, actually. I've done a few other videos concerning Stephen Miller and Machado concerning Venezuela. But today we're going to be talking about military aid to Ukraine and production within Ukraine and also Russia. And there's an awful lot to talk to you about, as I keep saying in every video. I think possibly due to the fact that Venezuela has taken up a lot of everyone's bandwidth, really. I've been unable to do this military aid update, and so I just keep adding to it day after day after day. And now there's a tab list as long as both my arms put together, where each tab is the width of a hair. So we have that many things to talk about. It's been a lovely day, though. I've just come back from lunch, a rare lunch with my missus, because she's working from home because her school, the boiler broke down. She works in the school as business manager. The boiler broke down, and there's a rule in the UK that if temperatures are below a certain level, and we've got a real cold snap at the moment, that you're not allowed to send kids into school because it's too cold for them. So rather than just give them a couple of jumpers and a scarf, it's like, nah, stay at home. So she was working from home today, and we went out for a lovely little lunch. So there you go. I'm in a fine fettle, I hope, or at least, you know, emotionally I'm in fine fettle. Whether my brain is working is another thing entirely. I do have, you'll be happy to know, a good cup of tea in my absolutely fabulous Russian warship, Go F Yourself, written as a Ukrainian trident. So that's awesome. What could go wrong? So as I say, we have quite a lot to talk about, and we're going to start, as I often do, with sort of funding. We're going to then talk about tangible aid to Ukraine and a few other things concerning some stuff concerning planes, actually. And troops. Coalition of Willings just met. Then we're going to talk about what Ukraine are building, and then some Russian stuff at the end. Okay, so let's get into this. And by the way, as you probably know, if you guys have been watching me long enough, my chair keeps depressing me. It keeps going down. It's broken, and I've just ordered a new one, so this is very exciting. So thank you to the people who have helped out the channel and supported the channel. I have just purchased a new chair for added comfort and non-depression. Right, that's enough babbling, absolute babbling. Let's get into it. As I always say, please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you haven't already done so. It makes a difference to the channel and keeps you in the loop. Okay, rock and roll. So we have, as I say, with the funding news, we have the EU preparing that big old 90 billion euro package for Ukraine that was originally hoped to entail the frozen Russian assets being used. I don't quite know exactly how this is being funded, other than it's a loan, but I don't know what it has to do, if anything, with the frozen Russian assets. I'd assume they're going to be trying to use profits from them or something to help underwrite this loan. But essentially, from Ukraine's point of view, there's not that much of a difference because the money is coming from Europe, whether it's coming from the Russian reparations, you know, Russian frozen assets or not, is kind of not so relevant. Anyway, they are getting that 90 billion euro loan package this year's 2026, with the first tranche expected by Q2. So that is what, April 2026. The legal framework is being finalized after the council's December approval. The package aims to support Ukraine through 2027, with regulations and financing terms set for adoption this January. So that's good news. Ukraine could forfeit, however, 3.6 billion euros in EU funds after failing to fulfill some conditions required for the money to be dispersed, according to a new report. So pretty much most of the money they get, it comes with strings attached, and they have to, you know, either involve strings involved in, you know, paying the money back, or I guess there'll be demands of certain nations having their corporate or industrial entities active in Ukraine as part of that money, or the IMF will set out stipulations to do with transparency and anti-corruption and so on and so forth. And when the EU give a bunch of money to Ukraine, similarly, there will be hurdles that they have to jump over, and rightly so. And it appears that they've missed some of them. They've done really well, all things considered, right throughout the war, in jumping through the hoops that they need to in order to continue their trajectory for acceding to the EU. But it looks like they might have missed some of these requirements. I don't know if that is surmountable as an issue or not. But anyway, according to a new report, they could forfeit it. So we'll have to wait and see. Norway is allocating over 3 million euros to support Ukrainian farmers, focusing on restoring fertile soil and aiding producers in frontline areas of Mykolaiv. So we know that Denmark very much is helping out in the Mykolaiv direction. But this is Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Chernihiv regions. Funds will go toward demining, seeds, irrigation, livestock aid, and emergency support. Now, I would assume, again, like, if not that I'm trying to be cynical, but if Norway's providing that money, I would assume that, whether it be the seeds come from a Norwegian company, irrigation equipment from Norway. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not that they're just going to get 3 million quid out their back pocket or down the back of the sofa and just throw it at Ukraine. The sort of strings that would be attached would probably entail some kind of economic stimulus for Norway itself. So that's money that will allow probably Norwegian agri producers and the industry to help Ukraine out there. But that's really good news. Japan has allocated almost 48 million euros for the reconstruction of Ukraine. These funds will go to programs for demining, energy restoration of water supply systems, development of public infrastructure, as well as projects in the fields of health, security, and education. In addition, the Japanese parliament approved an additional budget to continue grant programs and technical support for projects in Ukraine. Excellent news there. And then actually, I'm going to bring in this one next, because I think it's more relevant to what we've just been hearing. My chair has gone down again. Funds recently made available by the German government are already being used effectively, says German aid to Ukraine. He says that UNICEF Ukraine supported a local water utility company to repair and upgrade the water supply and treatment system in Nizhyn in the Chernihiv region to ensure access to safe water. So that money has already been effectively apportioned by all accounts, and that is allowing fresh water to get to certain parts of Ukraine where it otherwise was struggling. So good to see that. Now, the PURL initiative, the ability for European or NATO allies to buy equipment directly from the US and have that expedited to Ukraine, has seen Romania join it with a 50 million euro pledge to Ukraine's defense budget through buying of American goods there. So that's good news for Ukraine. But actually, it's not just Romania. Croatia has also joined the PURL initiative, says Zelensky, which now includes 24 countries, totaling $4.3 billion over its time in existence to purchase those US weapons for Ukraine, including things like Patriot missiles, etc. So yeah, that's good news. Croatia coming on board with that too. Okay, so that's all the funding stuff out of the way. Obviously super important, especially when it comes to the 90 billion smackaroonies going to Ukraine's, well, really towards the whole functioning of Ukraine's government and society. And they need that money desperately, not just to support their war efforts, but to support their very existence. Now we're going to talk about tangible aid in terms of equipment and whatnot. Last year, says Dennis Shmyhal, who's going to be moving from the defense minister. Remember, he previously was a prime minister, became the defense minister, and now is going to be the minister of energy, I believe, which is not a demotion. As I said recently, defense minister is super important in Ukraine, but actually energy minister, very important, especially in light of the massive scandals that happened there or have been ongoing there, the Mindich tapes and whatnot. energy is under such a massive pressure from those missiles and drones on a nightly basis that, you know, without energy, you get no defense manufacturing. So, you know, it's a really important position. Anyway, last year, he says, was a record for international support for Ukraine in the security sector. Total aid exceeded $45 billion. This is the highest figure since the start of the full-scale war, which is quite interesting, given that the US has stepped back from that, and almost 30% more than in 2024. And that's an incredible statistic there, since I was under the impression that last year I thought was lower than the previous year. Anyway, in light of that, Trump has stated that the US war in Ukraine, or the war in Ukraine for the US currently, quote, costs nothing and even brings profit. Quote, in fact, we are making money, unlike Biden, who just spent $350 billion. Now I have brought back a large part of that amount because we made an agreement on the extraction of rare earth metals. We will return a large part of this money, possibly all of it, or even more than we gave. Now they pay us when we send something, i.e. weapons. Every month, 25 to 30,000 soldiers die. These are not Americans. They are soldiers from Russia and Ukraine. If I could stop that, I would gladly do so. I think we will do this, said the president. Of course, one of the best ways to stop that is to provide weapons to them. So you would gladly do it if you could, but you're not, because you only want to make a profit out of the war through rare earth metals and weapons sales, but you won't provide any to Ukraine. So you are insulting Joe Biden, when Joe Biden arguably did a much more noble thing, much nobler thing than you, Donald Trump. So I find that really distasteful. That's like looking at a homeless person and saying, ha, yeah, you see that homeless person down there? I make money out of providing help to them. Yeah, I'm not giving them any money now. No, they can sod off. But I do sell stuff to other people who buy it, and then they give that to the homeless guy. Yeah, I'm making money out of him. Awesome. You'd be like, that's pretty distasteful, mate. I'm not sure I agree with that. But anyway, that's how this guy rolls. He is, there's a technical term. Hang on, I've got it. Complete bastard. That was it. He's a complete bastard. Moving on, the US stopped providing aid a while ago, says Tatragami. Then Trump took office, which means you can shove the hand that feeds argument up your ass, says Tatragami. Of course, Trump doesn't make too much of, well, he does make a lot of Biden giving away money as he sees it to Ukraine, but he says that's okay because we're going to make it all back and some. But anyway, here's some actual data for the aid to Ukraine. And you can see that the blue bars are European aid. I don't know if that's EU aid, actually. Note Europe includes EU member states and institutions, Norway, the UK, Iceland, and Switzerland. Okay, so that answers that question. So that's Europe plus, EU plus, that is Europe. And the kind of light blue grey color are other donors. You know, that's going to be Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, etc. And then the US in orange. And you can see that beginning of 2023, massive amount there going from the US, some big arms packages and whatnot. And then it just completely dies out in 2025. That bit of orange was just the leftover in January of what the Biden administration had pledged to Ukraine. And so since then, there has been absolutely nothing. And instead, the EU, or the Europe, sorry, has really stood up and helped out Ukraine in a really considerable way, as they've had to. And that's all, you know, good for Europe. The US has obviously just decided to do things differently, but at least there is still weaponry going from the US, even if it is paid for by Europe, to Ukraine. Okay, so just trying to keep hold of the live chat that's going on. There's a few interesting comments that I'll come to later. Right. and I do find it, I do find it slightly disgusting. Sorry to be a bit, offensive about Donald Trump, but I find it really distasteful for someone to say that isn't it horrible that this many people are dying, but actually we are not going to morally position ourselves in this. We are going to be, scare quotes, neutral. We are neutral. Who was it that was really deeply criticizing this the other day? It wasn't Adam Kinzinger. It was someone that was saying, there was an American saying, "Oh, this is a real problem. I'm sure it's an American saying, a real problem that we don't position ourselves as supporting Ukraine. Like this is just wrong." It's like, like I always say with Doris getting the crap kicked out of her, saying, "Hey, I'm neutral here. I'm not going to help anyone here. But I will sell the baseball bat to someone that does want to help Doris. But otherwise, it's just horrible to see this violence. It's horrible. It's violence. In my head, I can see that Ivan's like smacking the crap out of Doris. But both sides. No, it's clearly a moral issue here, whereby we can see an aggressor and we can see a victim, and we should be able to say openly and honestly, I recognize who the aggressor is and who the victim is, and I will therefore help the victim here. But that appears not to be the case. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Right, we're going to go to Czechia, and as I put in the title here, Czech no mate. Because the new Czech Prime Minister, Andrej Babiš, is no friend of Ukraine. Do you get that? Czech no mate, checkmate, Czech no mate. He's no mate. See, Czech is really similar to like Czech, but spelt different. Do you get it? Like, do you get it? So the Czech Prime Minister Babiš, from the Czech budget, he says we can no longer give money to Ukraine because we do not even have enough for our own school cooks or informal caregivers. If someone claims that Russia can be defeated, experts say that that is not possible. So that's his position. There is an argument to say, why should we be giving money to Ukraine when we have our own domestic needs for that money? But then there's another argument to say, if you don't, then the security of your country and the security of Europe as a whole is fundamentally challenged. We have some bad guys there, and if all of us turn the other way and do nothing, then they'll come knocking on our door eventually. Max25 here says Militiani says banking institutions in the Czech Republic are discriminating against defense companies that cooperate with Ukraine. There is a known case where one of the largest Czech banks closed the accounts of a company and the family members of a person whose company sold and sent weapons to Ukraine. So it's not about like stopping money going to Ukraine or getting in the way of that, but literally kind of sanctioning people who have been supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Czech initiative, Darek Pro Putin, a gift for Putin, which raises funds for military aid to Ukraine, also faced a similar situation. It is noted that none of the banks in the Czech Republic wanted to open an account for the fund at first. In addition, banks do not hesitate to pursue those who supply weapons to the Czech army. As the publication notes, for example, one of the banks threatened to close the account of a company that won a contract with the Czech army. So actually, this, although Andrej Babiš's situation is like anti-Ukraine, really, the actual situation with the banking scenario here, with Czech banks closing accounts and denying services to small arms manufacturers and related individuals because their business involves supplying weapons to Ukraine. Jakub Janowski, who's I presume therefore Czech, I always thought he was Polish. The guy from Oryx that now does the Oryx stuff says this has nothing to do with our stupid new government. So he is not a fan of the Babiš government, but he's saying actually it's got nothing to do with this government and is affecting the whole arms industry, not just Ukraine, supplies to Ukraine. The reason has been the absurd negative label for the arms industry in the various ESG policies of the foreign companies owning local banks. I don't really understand, but just be careful, because a lot of people have been jumping on Czechia for this, saying that this is evidence of their hostility towards Ukraine, politically speaking, with the new government. But actually that is an existing issue with banks to do with the military industry, which Ukraine is apparently and unfortunately caught up in. Now, good news, Italy had a vote the other day as to whether they were going to extend the ability to give military aid to Ukraine. It's not necessarily giving them more aid, but it allows them to give more aid. And they did vote for that extension. Prime Minister Meloni, Giorgia Meloni's cabinet, approved a decree on Monday to provide aid to Ukraine. According to Answer, the decree was the 11th extension of Italian aid. Meloni said Italy would support Ukraine for as long as necessary, although there has been some pulling back from helping as much as they were, although there are criticisms against Italy for not helping nearly enough given the size of their economy and arms industry and defense expenditure, etc. Although they've now recently given a whole bunch of kind of old equipment and obsolete equipment, which is, I think, going to be fair, or is being fairly warmly received in Ukraine. But they have pulled back on the PURL initiative, supporting the expenditure on US items for Ukraine, saying, and it was because they were, well, at least their claim was, the Italians stated it was because, get your brain in order, Pierce, that peace negotiations were, as they saw it, advancing, and because they could feel the end point was pretty close by, they're like, well, there's no point buying weapons for Ukraine through the United States and having them all, arrive in Ukraine in 6 months' time when the peace negotiation is going to be signed next week. Turns out that who knew that peace negotiations didn't end up getting signed, and they are ongoing. Right. We have no reports here reporting, showing a picture of a helicopter. And this is stuff like, when you and I don't mean to speak on behalf of all of you guys, but when I look at a picture like this, I'm like, oh, look, there's a helicopter that Ukraine's flying. That's awesome. Oh, look at the pretty colors. That's wicked. Whereas proper knowledgeable people go, I know exactly where that helicopter came from. That's this type of helicopter, and that's almost certainly one of that sort that came from Afghanistan. So a former Afghan Mi-8 MTV-5 helicopter, now in Ukrainian colors, was spotted with advanced German and Ukrainian missile protection technology. It features Hensoldt's ANAAR-60 sensors, part of the AMPS system. I actually do know a little bit about this because I reported on this. So Hensoldt were providing a defensive system for Ukrainian helicopters that involved, it depends how much stuff they have on there, but there are different areas of Hensoldt's AMPS. I wonder if I can find, there was a great video that I showed you way back of how all this stuff worked, but essentially it can automatically sort of release flares or try and take out an aerial threat with laser or whatever. There are different versions. Hensoldt AMPS. So here's someone pointing out that it's got that aspect. The AMPS from Hensoldt allows the Ukrainian Air Force to automatically detect and defeat incoming missiles with the missile launch detection sensors seen perched under the cockpit there. Other elements there. So they're talking about that. Lots of people have been doing their spotting of this. Here's a video. Right, this is exactly the video. 2023. So this is what I was showing you then. You can't hear this, and I'm not gonna play it actually, but essentially there are different elements inside a helicopter, and you can kind of pick and choose what you get. So it doesn't necessarily mean you get all of this, but essentially it can detect, fire off flares, hit the missile with laser to blind it. So solar blinding. Here you get missile warning system, passive sensors, high sensitivity, ultraviolet spectral band, solar blinds, high angular resolution, multi-threat capability, protection against missile threats, laser threats, and radar threats, and all of these sort of bits and pieces. You can go and find out how it all works. But anyway, it's really cool that this helicopter is known to be one of the ones that came from Afghanistan, and then that they've kitted it out with really modern protection capabilities there that have come from Germany. So that's all pretty cool, and I'm glad I could find that for you to give you greater context of what we're talking about here. So this Afghan helicopter's now got stuff on board that can help protect it. Okay, in 2025, Ukraine trained almost 100 cadet pilots who in the future will become the basis of the renewed air force, says Militiani. So this is absolutely fantastic news. Now, I don't know if that is Ukraine training them or whether these are cadet pilots that tend to. I don't know how many projects there are and how many conduits for training there are, but one of the main ones I think has been the UK taking cadets, training them in prop planes, literally how to fly, the basics of flying, the meteorology, and all the stuff that you need to know about weather and pressure and what else. I have no idea. All that kind of stuff. You learn the basics in the UK, then you go on to fly basic trainer jets in France, and then they were then going on to be trained on F-16s in, say, well, initially it was Denmark and then Czechia. Denmark's now not training them, and that has been moved, I presume, to Czechia and possibly Romania as well. And then the French, I don't know whether they were still providing pilots for F-16 training or whether they were then putting them onto Mirages or doing both. And I don't know whether, like, Romania and Czechia take on pilots from scratch as well. So there's a lot of unknowns here, but certainly one of the pathways was UK to France to F-16s. And I presume, that is still going on. So whether these 100 cadet pilots have been trained in Ukraine, I doubt it. It'd be a little bit too dangerous, I would have thought. And any training planes would be very viable targets for the Russians. So I assume that is elsewhere. But 100 cadet pilots, that sounds pretty good to me, considering you have obviously they've got the pilots they have at the moment, but they do lose pilots, and then I don't know how many pilots have retired since start of the war, whether they keep on going, and then you want to be increasing the size of your air force. I don't know how many pilots, and maybe someone knows this in the live chat, but how many pilots do you need per plane, for rotations and whatnot? So it's not like, hopefully we're going to get 70 new planes, so we need 70 pilots. No, 70 new planes, I assume you'd need, a good couple of hundred pilots at least for them. And so, yeah, but maybe not. I don't know. So how I would love Ukraine to be getting another, I keep pulling an arbitrary number of 70 out when I talk about planes, but I think that would be a game changer. Now, they are supposed to be getting quite a fair number of Gripen jets now, and they should be hopefully coming online. I hope they're training on them. They should be getting the older CD variants. What is it that they had 50 of them, maybe 50 or 60, as they get phased out, because they're the older Gripens from the Swedish Air Force. As they get the new Gripen E's and F's, they're getting the brand new ones off the production line in Sweden, and they give their older ones to Ukraine. And then once that's been done, I think that's to the tune of 60, wasn't it? Then Ukraine will get brand new Gripen E's and F's. So yeah, anyway, 100 cadet pilots sounds pretty good to me. Right, Ukrainian Mirage 2000 fighter jets have been equipped with French MICA medium-range air-to-air missiles to counter Russian air targets. MICA aircraft missile is designed to intercept and destroy highly maneuverable enemy manned and unmanned vehicles. Some people saying that actually they'd be too expensive, really, to use against Shahed drones, but certainly for cruise missiles and for other planes. Now, that's great if these give the Ukrainian jets slightly better protection against Russian aerial threats, against other Russian fighter jets or multi-role jets. Now, speaking of pilots, the air combat tactics, and I did say this to you this morning, but this is the right video really for it. The air combat tactics that the partners taught Ukrainian pilots during their F-16 training turned out to be unsuitable for the realities of the Ukrainian battlefield. The pilots had to independently think through the tactics of application near the line of combat contact. In other words, NATO training for pilots teaches you how to become eventually an experienced member or group leader or whatever of planes that generally won't fly alone and will fly in like 3s or 5s and fly in this particular way. And NATO usually assumes you've done a heck of a lot of suppression of enemy air defense or destruction of enemy air defense. But the air spaces are completely contested still, although the Ukrainians done a really good job of those DEAD and SEAD activity. They have, for example, in Crimea, they've really degraded the air defenses and radars, but nonetheless, it is contested airspace, and it's not particularly easy to operate in a way that NATO would otherwise operate. And so NATO, like I said earlier, you got UK, French, and then Czech and Romanian training, but essentially NATO training for these pilots. But they might not be able to fly their planes, even if they are NATO planes coming online, in the way that NATO would be used and therefore they've had to come up with their own kind of tactics. Ukrainian pilots have to use maneuvering tactics at low altitudes. It's more difficult for enemy radars and missile homing heads to capture and hold a target against background of the ground, which creates a significant amount of background noise and blocks the radar's direct visibility. Sometimes F-16 pilots from the cover group who accompany aircraft equipped with high-precision aerial bombs for strike missions deliberately set up themselves in order to lure the enemy aircraft. I talked about, wild weasels, these missions in, say, Vietnam and on, which is where you're trying to attract air defenses by making yourself known, and then the air defenses lock onto you, and as they then show themselves, the air defenses, the rest of your guys take out the air defenses, so you become bait for the air defenses. Well, here, these other planes that are in a group might sort of hire themselves up into higher airspace, attract the air defenses, and that allows the core of the mission, which is a bombing run, a bombing sortie, to take place. So set themselves up in order to lure the enemy aircraft, force it to expend ammunition, and thus provide an opportunity to deliver the bombing strike. So here it talks about enemy aircraft rather than enemy air defense, but I guess both would be relevant. Now, Poland's MiG-29 pipeline is turning into sustained precision pressure on Russian front lines, says Euromaidan Press. The jets enter Ukrainian service almost immediately. Pilots already know the aircraft. So remember, they had something like 29 MiGs or something like that they were phasing out, that are now obsolete. It appears that Ukraine are getting at least 6 to 8 of these, or have already got some of these, or maybe all of them. I don't know what's happening to the rest of them, or whether they are going to go eventually, or whether there's some reason that they can't go to Ukraine. But the jets enter, the ones they do get, enter Ukrainian service almost immediately, and the pilots already know these aircraft. These are old Soviet-era aircraft that they are already well versed with. The Polish modification programs have already adapted them for Western precision munitions, like, for example, the AASM Hammer bombs. No conversion delays there. Ukraine is using them to strike the brief windows when Russian forces are most vulnerable, assembled for attacks but not yet dispersed. One bomb on an assembly point can wipe out an entire assault before it moves. The strikes are hitting multiple fronts. On the northern border, MiG-29s are cancelling raids before they begin. Geolocated footage shows a hammer bomb collapsing a house where Russian infantry had gathered with a command post around Pokrovsk. Strikes target assembly buildings and approach routes, forcing Russian units onto longer detours and breaking the timing needed for encirclement. Drone operators, who take months to train under combat conditions, are priority targets. Near Spanivka, strikes on key crossings stalled a potential breakthrough, forcing Russian troops to advance slowly through mud on foot. And in the Zaporizhia direction, airstrikes are hitting Russian footholds before FPV operators can get within range of the city. Now, this is all very pro-Ukrainian stuff. This is coming from, it says read our frontline report, but these are video transcriptions of reporting from Ukraine. It's pretty reliable source reporting from Ukraine, but generally very pro-Ukrainian. Warsaw discussed releasing another 6 to 8 MiG-29s in late 2025. That's what I was referencing, following 14 transferred in 2023. If deliveries continue, Russia's force concentrations near the front line will keep getting hit at the most vulnerable moments, says a report from Ukraine. Now, tea break. Given what the United States is doing at the moment with regard to Venezuela and Greenland being between Canada and Iceland, Canada and Scandinavia and Europe, given the US's very bellicose rhetoric with all of its allies, Canada is getting, as I said the other day, rather jittery and indeed pretty upset with what they're hearing from the United States. And I know I've got Karen in the live chat from Canada. I'm sure I saw her. Yes, Karen Spinnock, there you are. So I have my Canadians here, not my Canadians, my Canadian viewers. So Dean Blundell here says, hearing that there is zero chance Canada buys, he's hearing zero chance that Canada buys F-35s from the US. Wow. So remember that they are due to buy something like 88 F-35s. They legally had to buy something like 16 of them, which they, I believe, have done so. And then they were wondering whether all the rest, they were wondering whether they had to buy those from the US, or could they get other planes that can do the job of the F-35 to some degree, or you could use them differently. Gripen compared to the F-35 is not going to win most of the with most of the metrics of success. The F-35s are going to come first and Gripen's going to come second. There are certain advantages Gripen have in certain areas, but do you need an F-35? What are the costs of each plane comparatively, and the maintenance schedules and costs and so on and so forth? So there can be advantages to buying the Gripen over the F-35. And if the US has the ability to operate a kill switch, so they say, right, so Canada and the US come to blows, then the US says, well, we're going to put things in place so you can't operate your F-35s. Then Canada is going to rue the moment they got their F-35. So after yesterday's BS, says Dean Blundell, Canada is expected to announce a major deal to manufacture Saab Gripen in Canada. So remember, Saab then went to Canada recently on a kind of on a bit of a marketing mission. And they said, look, if you order Gripens, we'll get some manufacturing going on in Canada. And that should ensure something like 10,000 jobs, which, of course, is going to be a real benefit for them choosing Gripens over F-35s. So it looks like Canada might announce a major deal to manufacture Saab Gripens in Canada. There isn't a democratic country in the world or Western Hemisphere that will be placing orders for US military equipment going forward, not one. And I do wonder about it. I know this isn't necessarily to do with Ukraine, but I do wonder what the outcome for the American military industrial complex is going to be going forward over the next year, well, over the rest of the Trump administration. I mean, I imagine that on the one hand, they'll be like, yeah, okay, the US is strong arming around the sort of Caribbean region in the Western Hemisphere. That's all good and well. And therefore that could be good for business or whatever. But on the other hand, all of our allies, that they're the main ones that buy us, and we generally don't sell weapons to our enemies, right? So we only really sell to our allies. And if all of our allies think we're being a bag of dicks, then I'm afraid that our chances of selling stuff going forward are very much, we're in trouble. And in fact, although I was going to talk about this right at the end of this section, it's probably worth bringing this in. So Europe's largest defense groups are set to return $5 billion to shareholders in 2025, says the Financial Times. And this is in stark contrast to the defense. And I'm not trying to advocate for the military industrial complex. Goodness me, who thought I'd be saying anything remotely like that 10 years ago? But but from a security and an industrial point of view, Europe needs to stand up on its own 2 feet. So that's what the US has wanted for a long time, and they've criticized Europe over. And actually, here's our opportunity to do so. But it will, as I said to you before, it will be a gut punch for the American military-industrial complex. Like, as much as Americans might like Europe to be independent from the US, actually, the reason that Europe have hitherto been dependent on the US is because the US have wanted them to be dependent on them. Like, there's a return on investment. If you are the United States, right, and you have NATO, which effectively is operating like to your desires, like NATO is America's thing. And it is to the benefit of these smaller nations who get that protection from NATO. Yeah, but it's something that the US gets to determine. And they also say, and by the way, you're buying this and you're going to need that. You can buy that from here. And essentially, you've got a whole landscape that exists, a military industrial landscape that exists across the Western world, where the American military industrial complex is funded massively by European and allied expenditure. And then so you can't have everything. You can't have the EU going and standing on their own 2 feet and still have everyone buying what you want them to buy and doing what you want them to do. So the return on investment that the US has in paying over the odds, if you like, for European security is they get to dictate European security, and they get to dictate, broadly speaking, or at least to some degree, what Europe buys and where they buy it from, i.e. us. So the more that Europe doesn't depend on the US, you get the isolationists in the US going, yeah, that's brilliant. But then you get the big tech and military tech and industrial companies going, hang on, don't do this, because you are now cutting off one of our major sources of income here. And this is highly controversial. So, honestly, the people that talk about, and you see this with politicians all the time, saying, Europe hasn't paid enough for so long, blah, blah, blah. And that is to a large degree true. But it also has worked to the US's advantage. Like, otherwise they wouldn't have had it that way. I know they complain about it, but actually the return on investment is they get to dictate everything in terms of national security. And they get to export their security. As I keep telling you, Perun did a marvelous video towards the beginning of the war where he talked about NATO expenditure and essentially what the US gets from spending more than everyone else, and why you might get people like JD Vance and Donald Trump complaining about that. Actually, what you get is a really, really good military industrial complex that is funded by that, and you export security, and then on the back of that you get preferential trade deals and all sorts. So they're all, go and watch the Perun video on that. I think it's really, really revealing. Give me 2 secs. Sorry, kids are back from school and with friends and making lots of noise. So I just thought I'd have a word to them. I'll do my parenting with them later, of course. Going back to this article in the Financial Times, what you're seeing as a result of this Trumpian, not so much isolationism as Monroe doctrinism, which is, this is our hemisphere, you guys stay away from us, we're going to pull back from Europe, we're not going to help out Ukraine, you guys do it all yourselves, and we're going to attack places in Latin America. You've had Europe saying, okay, well, all our money is now going to be spent in Europe and not on you guys, because you guys have become unreliable allies, and Canada likewise. And so you've now got European defense groups doing brisk business, right? And actually just in general, European stock markets have done better than the American stock market, even though the S&P 500 is at record levels. It's actually underperformed compared to European stock markets, so on and so forth. I saw a really interesting graph the other day of all the stock markets around the world, actually. And the US is really quite a long way down in terms of performance against other stock markets, which is interesting because it's reached record levels. You get a lot of people cheering on how well the American stock market has done, but actually in context, it's arguably not done as well. And here's an example of where it's underperformed. So where you've got Airbus and Rheinmetall and all these big BAE systems doing really well in Europe. By contrast, shareholder returns by six largest defense companies in the US, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, RTX Corporation, L3 Harris Technologies, and Huntington Ingalls have fallen after hitting a 10-year peak in 2023. So since 2023, they've taken a bit of a hit. And I think there's just a really interesting dynamic there that shows. And, when you go back to what Canada might be choosing, I think that's reflective of a malaise that's been brought on by very confrontational diplomacy from Trump with regard to Trump's America's allies. So then there's this from Adam Cochran. Are you kidding me? He says, I'm all for the US funding defensive side for its allies, but Israel does not need 25 F-15s, let alone ones fully paid for by the Pentagon. So in the context of Trump, as we heard earlier, saying, hey, we're making money out of the war in Ukraine, we're not giving any stuff to Ukraine, we're making people buy stuff off us, but we're not helping out Ukraine. We then hear that they are helping out Israel. He says that Israel does not need 25 F-15s, let alone ones fully paid for by the Pentagon. This is 1/3 of the money we gave Ukraine for old equipment ready to decommission across 3 years of an active invasion from our largest geopolitical adversary. MAGA was screaming tooth and nail about it and saying we had to end the Biden war spending. I absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself, and we should give them the tools to defend themselves, says this particular person, as we should our other allies like Ukraine, but we should not be paying for a wealthy nation to get strike-capable fighters until they can show an ability to be responsible when conducting strikes. Netanyahu buys Trump one dumb plaque, and Trump hands him $8 billion in fighter jets. Good job with your America First, MAGA. So $8.6 billion contract Boeing was awarded that by the Pentagon for 25 F-15s for Israel. And that's just December the 30th that came in. Wow. So, Ukraine is desperate for stuff. Trump says, hey, we ain't giving them jack. We're going to make money out of them, and we're going to use that money to spend weaponry on Israel so they can go and bomb people in Gaza. And you're like, whoa, okay, this is not cool, as Adam Cochran, I think, points out there. But there you go. Goodness me. Right, where are we? Okay, good to have you still active in the live chat there. So we're going to now go on to a little more to do with American aid. Here we have Trump's second term being claimed by Clash Report here. During Trump's second term, Fox News personalities became an informal influence channel in US policy toward Ukraine. At times, weapons deliveries approved under the prior administration were slowed or paused inside the Pentagon under Pete Hegseth. These pauses were not always publicly announced, and routine military or diplomatic channels often failed to resolve them. In at least one documented case, Ukrainian officials and US military officers contacted Brian Kilmeade. So if you don't know who Brian Kilmeade is, for those outside of the American media world, Brian Kilmeade is one of the guys from Fox and Friends, one of the kind of the main ones, although there seem to be all sorts there on Fox and Friends now. But it was traditionally Ducey and Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade has his own kind of Fox sort of radio vlog show as well. And he often gets Trump on the blower for that, on the phone for that. And Brian Kilmeade is also a supporter of Ukraine. And he's one that subtly holds people to account when Ukraine comes up in conversation on Fox and Friends when he's there. He's a useful friend of Ukraine because he's right in the kind of MAGA mix there. And here it says, in at least one documented case, Ukrainian officials and US military officers contacted Brian Kilmeade, who had direct access to President Trump. After those conversations, Trump intervened and shipments resumed. So literally, like stalled shipments of weaponry to Ukraine were freed up with a phone call to Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends. Absolutely incredible. A similar pattern occurred with a shipment of 18,000 US-made artillery shells held in Germany for months, which was released after intervention by Jack Keane. So Jack Keane, he's a General Keane, is a former. I mean, you know, if I got you, Brian, just in case you don't know, I know many of you do, but I have an audience from all over the place. So Brian Kilmeade is Fox and Friends. Well, you can go and find him. Let's go and Brian Kilmeade. This is what he looks like. There you go. There he is on the right there. Brian Kilmeade. Oh God, typical. Okay, it's gone. Well, shows me I shouldn't. There he is. Brian Kilmeade. There. That's Brian Kilmeade. So he sits in on Fox and Friends. So just phoning him gets stuff sorted out. And then you've got General Keane as well, who's a retired general. He's also on Fox an awful lot as a real. Really important contributor. That's him very much younger. He's very much older now. Here he is. He is a really big supporter of Ukraine, and it's really good to have him support Ukraine on Fox News. There he is, that older gentleman there. So anyway, these two end up being go-to individuals for foreign military organizations seeking to, or allies of Ukraine seeking to free up entire arms shipments. It's absolutely ridiculous that you're having to phone up Fox News personalities to get that done. That's coming from the New York Times there. Now, going back to Germany and their assistance to Ukraine, a transformer from the Rheinhafen Dampfkraftwerk Karlsruhe power plant in Germany has arrived in Ukraine to support its energy grid amid ongoing Russian attacks. The delivery was coordinated with the help of GIZ Ukraine as part of the German-Ukrainian energy partnership backed by the German government. Excellent stuff to see Germany continuing to help Ukraine as much as they do with their getting some power plants to Ukraine. And we heard, of course, that Lithuania got an entire power plant, like an entire power plant was uprooted and sent to Ukraine bit by bit. And it was the largest logistical project the EU has ever done. And that was done. And, you know, I was saying, you know, I know people get bored of me being a bit of a cheerleader for the EU, but I think, you know, if we don't cheerlead the EU at the moment, then there's trouble in Europe, because you've got Russia and China chomping at the bit, and then the US don't care for Europe at all, or well, the Trump administration, sorry, doesn't care for Europe at all. And you know, if the EU disunites, then there is no one standing up for democracy, I don't think, in a major way, in the way that the EU can and does in the world. So I think it's super important. But there's no other organization that could take apart an entire power plant and move it from Lithuania to Ukraine. Who else would do that? Who else would be able to afford to do that, that would want to do that? So I think things that the EU do are really significant when it comes to assisting Ukraine. Yes, it has its problems and challenges, and the votes of unanimous votes and all sorts of things like that make it very challenging. Right, so going to Norway now. Norway's Alesund. So if I have Stephen Bendal, don't know if I've got Stephen Bendal in the chat, but I'm pretty sure, Stephen, you're from Alesund. So yeah, wonder if you'd know about this. The business community there raised 1.5 million krona for a fully equipped patrol boat to be delivered to the Ukrainian Navy. Vessel includes radar navigation technology, wool clothing, life jackets, and critical supplies. Aid organization Fritz Ukraine coordinated the delivery. Is that the one that I think Erland from Tuchny works with as well? Fundraising begins for boat number 2 there. So that's fantastic of the Norwegians to have done that. So brilliant stuff. What we like to see. Now here we have news of Latvia. Latvia will transfer to Ukraine a new batch of cars confiscated from drunk drivers. So this has happened really from quite early on in the war. They said that any car that they confiscated, drunk drivers, I don't know if there are any other confiscations that you can have there, they would get to Ukraine. These cars are intended for military units in the Ministry of Defense, the National Guard, the Kyiv Multidisciplinary Clinical Hospital, and the Novoronttsovka military administration. So that's 21 cars. It doesn't say it there, but 21 cars went in this particular group of cars going to Ukraine. That's absolutely fantastic. You get your car taken off you, confiscated because you've been drunk driving, it's going to Ukraine. Brilliant. Not that I would advocate people, more drunk driving though, to get more cars to Ukraine. Die Welt in Germany reports that European countries are considering deploying up to 15,000 troops in Ukraine within 6 months after the end of the war to monitor the ceasefire as part of the coalition of the willing. Actually, this has now been updated as of today. So it started off sort of 15,000. France and the UK are ready to deploy without UN or EU mandate. Kyiv's invitation would suffice. Turkey is expected to take responsibility for the Black Sea region, but then the coalition of the willing has met today in Paris, and actually quite a lot has taken place, I think. So a Ukrainian-American subgroup of the coalition of the willing will be created in Paris. This is stated in the draft of the Paris Agreement following today's meeting. By the way, they officially said we're not going to talk about Greenland because we don't want to piss off the Americans. Essentially, is what they said. So they're like, although there's been a separate statement of solidarity for Denmark and Greenland also come out today. But anyway, the document also states that the Allies will resume legal obligations to Ukraine in the event of future aggression. Obligations may include use of military capabilities, intelligence and logistical support, diplomatic initiatives, and the application of additional sanctions. Guarantees will also include a multinational deterrent force for Ukraine and support for the restoration of the armed forces of Ukraine. And we understand now that France, Great Britain and Turkey at the summit in Paris will defend the idea of deploying peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, according to Le Monde. The foreign peacekeeping contingent could number from 15 to 20,000 soldiers, and in some scenarios up to 30,000 soldiers. France and Great Britain should provide the bulk of the ground forces. Turkey will be responsible for maritime security in the Black Sea. The US is in this scenario will provide logistical and intelligence support. The deployment of forces is planned mainly in Western Ukraine. And you can see that if you can speak French, la coalition des volontaires va aborder la question du déploiement de troupes en Ukraine. France, the UK and Turkey will push a plan to deploy those forces at that meeting. And I don't know if that's finished now. I assume it probably has. But it could be a more sizable contingent than was previously thought to be around 15,000. If in some scenarios, it could be 30,000. That's obviously going to be more of a deterrent to the Russians. Finally, for this section, Maria Drutska says, in the event of a Russia-NATO war, Germany would become a key base and transit corridor for Allied forces, and therefore one of the first targets for strikes on both military and civilian infrastructure. They'll be sort of gaming all of this, won't they, as they are also trying to work out what logistical and infrastructural improvements need to be made in order to move NATO forces across Europe. This is why part of the 5% expenditure, 5% of GDP expenditure on defense includes what 3.5% is stuff like military equipment and the usual kind of expenditure, and then 1.5% is infrastructural, because actually there needs to be an awful lot of infrastructural improvements in order to have an effective military force do their thing within Europe. Politico reports that Germany has prepared a classified contingency plan for such a scenario. The operational defense plan treats cyber attacks, sabotage, and disinformation not as isolated incidents, but something that, quote, can fundamentally serve to prepare military confrontation. There's news coming out today that there are spies on ships on fishing trawlers near Norway. There's a whole bunch of stuff to do with Norway coming out today. I'll be reporting that tomorrow in my hits and losses video and in the last section of that. Today's one of those days where I just feel like, as ever, there could be I could be providing just a rolling news video for you. Just so much stuff happening all the time. And I also want to get you all this stuff to do with all the knowledge about what's going on with regard to military equipment and etc. etc. Right. Before we go on to the next section, and some of the headline stuff is in the next section. So there's loads of really good news concerning Ukraine. And it's interesting, just as a bit of an aside, gives me a chance to take a breather, look at some of your comments and whatnot. I was having a word to Pierre on a back channel. So Pierre's one of the guys that I went around both the times I went to Ukraine. I went around with Pierre. He's an absolute legend. And I was just saying, look, I get a sense at the moment, I'm slightly upbeat about Ukraine's position at the moment. I'd be interested what you guys think about this. I probably need to do a separate video entirely on this, but I get a sense that the Russians are being treated quite badly at the moment on the front lines. They are making heavy losses. Magyar's birds are becoming, the unmanned systems forces are becoming both more prevalent, more effective, and more numerous. They are, scaling up Magyar's birds' capabilities and size, and as a result, these guys are having huge impact on the front line and Russia's ability to mount attacks and getting hit, as we heard earlier in this video, trying to hit these with what reporting from Ukraine was saying, with the use of planes, trying to hit these attacks before they happen. Troop accumulations, they've been really high. December's the worst month of losses, personnel losses for Russia. And it was, I think there's this possibly, and I hope this is a moment where Russia really then starts feeling the heat in terms of personnel in a way that goodness me, they should have felt before this point in the war. But December, they took more losses than they could recruit. And if that can continue, then that really nullifies Russia's ability to take large amounts of land. And then you put that together with, and this is what we're going to talk about in a second, Ukraine scaling up the production of FP1, FP2, FP5, and maybe FP7 and FP9 drones and missiles and ballistic missiles coming online. And then, as I've said before, you got the UK break stop cheap cruise missile coming online soon. You got the Czech Narwhal cruise missile should be coming online imminently. And then Ukraine's own missiles and drones, and they're claiming that they're now making 200 long range, and I don't know if that's long range and medium range, whether that's like FP1s and FP2s or just FP1s. If they're making 200 FP1s a day, then you can add on to that FP2s. But anyway, the point being that they say 200 Firepoint alone is making 200 long range drones a day. And assuming it's only going to get more than that, you get to a point where Ukraine is able to send a really considerable amount of firepower into Russia and into occupied territories in Ukraine, and add that to the destruction of Russian materiel and all sorts and personnel losses. I just get this sense that Ukraine might be turning a corner to some degree. And then you've got the economic woes of Russia to add on to that as well. And, fingers crossed, I don't want to be too hopey and copey, because it's really terrible for Ukraine's energy infrastructure at the moment, which then affects their ability to manufacture stuff too. So, there are loads of vulnerabilities, and their own personnel position is very, very precarious indeed. But there are some signs. I wonder, and I've talked about this before, whether the waiting game, like time, people have always thought time is on Russia's side, and all they need to do is wait this out for Western allies to get bored and for the US to walk away. That's a game they were playing. So you could argue that actually time is on Russia's side, but you could also make a case that time's on Ukraine's side. And the longer Ukraine are able to wait this out without losing too much land, if they can bleed Russia for every square kilometer that they lose to a massive degree and ramp up their own military production of weapons that they can use without having to seek permission from anyone, then you get to this point where they can really give it to the Russians in a way that really hurts. And that together with sanctions and the Russian economy struggling, then 2026 could look better for Ukraine. But there are loads of caveats to be applied to that, of course. No Todd, as an aside here, says the amount of trolls on my Ukraine cams channel dropped off significantly about a week ago. We haven't had groups of trolls for days there. I have noted quite a lot of pro-US trolls on Venezuela. It's really weird. Like, you're wondering who's paying for these trolls, or are they genuine pro-MAGA people? I don't know. But yeah, I wonder if there are fewer pro-Russia trolls hanging around at the moment. Thank you to Kevin Force for gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. It's really kind of you, mate. Thank you. The Pirate, please like, subscribe, and share. It's free. Yeah, thank you, Pirate. Thank you very much, and appreciate that. Karen Spanook, my Canadian viewer, I'm sure I have more than one, says, almost 2 years ago, I sent you a message I didn't expect you to read online. I said that Trump was going to try to take Canada if elected. Most comments said that I was a crazy fear mongerer. Well, this is... I don't think he will try and take Canada, but he will try and economically coerce Canada. And I think that's what he's going to do to Greenland. I think that he's doing a lot of trolling with Greenland, but it's really dangerous. That trolling here is a diplomatic affront. It is diplomatic aggression towards allies. So, claiming that you're not ruling out military incursions into Greenland is really aggressive, I think. But essentially, it will probably boil down to the United States economically bullying Greenland and Denmark to make concessions to the United States, so they have much more overt control over Greenland and what goes into Greenland and how it's used. Although some will argue they've already got that, they don't need to go any further. Actually, Denmark broadly allow them to militarily do what they like in Greenland, so on and so forth. And with Canada, I honestly, like, the American population, I bloody hope just would not allow the United States to attack Canada militarily. But I think there are other ways of attacking Canada, right? And it doesn't just have to be militarily. They're diplomatically with tariffs and sanctions. But it seems that Mark Carney and his government have done a pretty good job of diverting that kind of pressure and finding other sources for exports and whatnot. So yeah. Sorry, there are screaming babies if you can hear them outside in the kitchen. But yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on, obviously, what goes on with Canada, because I think you're more likely to see. So at the moment, you've had Donald Trump make claims about. Sorry, bear with me just 2 ticks. Yes, so sorry, screaming babies going nuts. Yeah, you've had this conversation, or this talk from Trump and Trump adjacent people talking about Cuba and Colombia and Mexico, and obviously Canada, Iran, Ukraine, and Greenland, right? And I think what you've got to do is work out an order in which you're going to see either kinetic or diplomatic pressure on those places. I don't think you'll see any kinetic pressure on Cuba like you've seen in Venezuela, but I think because they've hit Venezuela and they're going to seek to control oil transport, that will screw Cuba. And what they'll try and force is Cuba to fall apart economically to then try and enact some kind of regime change there, but from within. But Colombia, you might see pressure. But the point is, you're going to see much more focus, I think, in that whole area and Mexico before you see Canada. But they are apparently working on this document with Greenland. So I was going to say Greenland will be down the list of priorities, but actually they're talking. If you heard Stephen Miller in that video I did earlier, he said he's formally saying that Greenland should be part of America, and that is a formal position of the United States. In other words, that is policy now. It is policy that they will have Greenland one way or the other. So actually, I was going to say I'd put Greenland further down, and you'll see Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, and those kind of areas be focused on before Greenland. But I'm not so sure. But I think Canada you put right at the end of that list. But still, there's going to be I don't know. Crazy times that we live in. Right. Okay. So moving on to the Ukrainian section here, we have to start with, and there's some pretty exciting stuff here. And I've always said that Ukraine wins by fighting a war from a distance, or Ukraine prevails. I don't think anyone wins. Ukraine prevails by scaling up production. All of these weapons that we're going to be talking about at the front end here, these long-range drones and things like missiles, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, are all game changers. Every single one's a game changer if you can make enough of them. So FP1 drone is a game changer if you have 1,000 of them a day. You send 1,000 FP1s a day into Russia and occupied territories, you prevail. Russia capitulates. They wouldn't be able to deal with 1,000 a day every day. But of course, that's completely unrealistic. So, but the key is scale. And if Ukraine want to prevail, they have to scale up their own production of missiles and drones. And that's why I've been a little bit more upbeat. And as you heard me just now saying, are we starting to see a corner being turned here where attrition levels are hurting Russia to the point where they can't actually generate the forces to replace their losses? And Ukraine are really ramping up their use of near, rear, and distance drones and missiles. Ukraine is in a phase where it's using all available weapons to deep strike, says Zelensky. According to him, what is not allowed to be used, partners simply do not send. If we're sent anything, we use it, as I understand that. So Storm Shadows, Scalp PGs, if we're sent them, we're using them. 95% we now understand of Ukraine's long-range drones are now domestically produced. Wow. A key commander says supply is stable and growing with major effects expected in 2026. Again, people talking about 2026 being a big time for Ukrainian weapons as Kyiv steps up deep strike operations. We have Ukraine produces more than 200 long-range strike drones per day, says technical director of Firepoint, Irina Terek. Now, does long-range include FP2s as well? Remember, the FP1 goes 1,600 kilometers, has a 30-kilogram warhead. I think it's something like that. The FP2 drone is a much shorter range drone, 200 kilometers, but still that can get you to Crimea, that can get you into occupied territories, but it has a much bigger warhead because it doesn't need to go so far. So all of that weight isn't in fuel, it's in payload, and it has a 105 kilogram warhead. And then they have similar drones with sort of anywhere between 25 and 105 kilogram warhead, goes in that kind of near ear area. And then they've got all of their close range drones, FPVs, bomber drones, fiber optic drones, all that kind of stuff. But if 200 long-range drones per day are FP1s, then that's cool. It says we are talking about FP1, FP2 drones, though. So, okay, so 200 long and medium range. I mean, that's still really bloody good, and that's why we're seeing so many Primari videos and similar, Robert Brovdi videos of these montages of radars getting absolutely shellacked and air defense systems. My goodness, if they can keep that up every single day, then Russia is in for a really difficult next 3 or 4 months. The cost of these FP1s, that's 1,600 kilometers, 30 kilograms, $58,000. That is considerably cheaper than the Russian Shahed, although it has a smaller warhead. and actually the Russians are adapting their Shaheds quite a lot. Someone says, why isn't Europe producing another 400 a day for Ukraine at the European level? Producing 400 drones a day shouldn't be a problem. No, I'd agree. Like this is the key. But the frustration is, like, I'm just some random dude on the internet that said that like bloody years ago. And I know it takes time to develop these things, but we had like cruise missiles that could be like, I said to you literally years ago, like 2 years ago plus, that one idea I had was the UK doesn't provide anything else. It just provides Storm Shadow missiles. Says, right, you guys will specialize. You guys do all of that. We'll just provide Storm Shadows. Everything that we provide for Ukraine will be Storm Shadows. Bring the cost down of Storm Shadows, develop some new cruise missiles, cheaper cruise missiles like they've done with the break stop, but do that earlier. That's the last year's been taken to develop the break stop. That could have been put in place like 2.5 years ago. And then we just provide missile after missile after missile. They need these distance weapons to do what they're hoping to do. And I think that's right. Why is Europe not helping to provide another 400 of these a day? Ukrainian drone maker Firepoint has localized 97% of engine production for its long-range FP1 and FP2 drones. CTO Irina Turek says, and 80 of 82 parts are made in-house, from casting to final assembly. At $58,000, the FP1 is far cheaper than Russia's Shaheds. Awesome. Now, the UAE plans to buy a stake in Firepoint, according to BBC News. The Ukrainian company is known for its FP1 and FP2 drones, as well as the long-range Flamingo missiles. The deal will sell 30% of the company's shares. The deal is worth $760 million. In total, Firepoint, a manufacturer of strike drones and cruise missiles, was valued at $2.5 billion. Wow, how far that company has come. Now, there are obviously there are these rumors of preferential treatment of Firepoint, friends of Zelensky, and corruption and all that. But yeah, I'm not too sure about UAE coming in. I'd be a little bit uneasy about if I was something like BAE Systems, right? I would be looking at this going, "Oh, really? We'll offer 800 million." You know, and I'd be the UK government saying, "Yeah, and we'll help you out with that," or something like that. You know, I don't know. I feel a little bit uneasy, especially given UAE is one of these nations that's nominally at least on side with Russia to, I think, to a significant degree. Anyway, the developers of the Backfire drone, which is kind of a similar sort of drone to an FP2 drone, they've updated the Backfire drone and almost tripled its payload. At the same time, they've also increased the drone's maximum range from 140 to 160 kilometers to now 180 to 200 kilometers. So that is now in I guess competition with the FP2 drone. I don't know what its new payload is, but again, you know, you've got Backfire drones on top of FP1s and FP2 drones. So if you've got Irina Turek saying, hey, we are making 200 FP1s and FP2s a day, how many are Backfire making? And then how many Lutis are being made, and how many of this are being made, and how many Peklas and Palantirs are being made? You know, this is potentially a useful time for the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, and they are providing enough of a scale for Ukraine to really make a difference. Again, that is why I'm somewhat upbeat. In 2025, the MOD, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, admitted to more than 1,300 new models of domestically produced weapons and military equipment. 1,300 new bits of kit, as in new models, not numbers of stuff in total, new models of equipment, which is 25% more than the year before. That is significant. We are starting to see some serious scale. In Ukraine, the first operators of critical infrastructure in the energy and defense industries have purchased and installed electronic warfare equipment to protect their own facilities. I reported this the other day. Dennis Shmihal reported that enterprises can use their own funds to buy electronic warfare equipment. You can buy military equipment to defend your own, I don't know, comms towers, or your own privately owned like DTEC, privately owned power plants or whatever, you can use that to protect your own, rather than wait for the government to provide its own funded air defense systems and radars and electronic warfare equipment. If you can afford to help yourselves and therefore protect your own interests, your own assets, then please feel free to do so. Now, we've got a huge article from the New York Times that I'm going to very much dip into. I'm going to do more than dip into, but it's really interesting. Ukraine is deploying AI drones that strike autonomously. Ukraine is deploying these that they can keep flying and strike targets after losing contact with their operators, helping to overcome jamming. Systems like the Bumblebee have reportedly flown over 1,000 combat missions, and Ukraine has also partnered with Eric Schmidt's defense firm Swiftbeat to scale drones. So he's a former CEO of Google, I think it is, to scale drone production and improve Shahed interception. Now, I reported that in my last, I think, military aid update, but what I didn't do is look at the original article. So let's look at some of this and get our teeth into it, because there's a lot in here that I think you'll be quite excited by. Okay, on a warm morning a few months ago, Lipa, a Ukrainian drone pilot, flew a small grey quadcopter over the ravaged fields near Borisivka, a tiny occupied village abutting the Russian border. Surveillance drone had spotted signs that an enemy drone team had moved into an abandoned warehouses at the village's edge. Lipa and his navigator Boba intended to kill the team or drive it off. Another pilot had twice tried hitting the place with standard kamikaze quadcopters, which are susceptible to radio wave jamming and can disrupt the communication link between the pilot and the drone, causing weapons to crash. Russian jammers stopped them. Lipa had been assigned the third try, but this time with a Bumblebee, an unusual drone provided by a secretive venture led by Eric Schmidt, the former chief executive of Google, one of the world's wealthiest men. Boba sat beside Lipa as he oriented for an attack run from high over Borisivka. One of the Bumblebee's 2 airborne cameras focused on a particular building's eastern side. Boba checked the imagery, then a digital map, then agreed they'd found the target. Locked in, Lipa said. With his right hand, Lipa toggled a switch, unleashing the drone from human control. Powered by artificial intelligence, the Bumblebee swept down without further external guidance. As it descended, it lost signal connection with Lipa and Boba. This did not matter. It continued its attack free of their command. Its sensors and software remained focused on the building and adjusted heading and speed independently. Another drone live streamed the result. The Bumblebee smacked into the exterior wall and exploded. Whether Russian soldiers were harmed was unclear, but a semi-autonomous drone had hit where human-piloted drones missed, rendering the position untenable. Quote, "They will change their location now," Lipa said. Per Ukrainian security rules, soldiers are referred to by their first name or call sign. Okay, so that's your introduction into this. So it continues later. That conclusion was prescient but understated for the simple reason that bumblebees hardly fly alone. Under the pressures of invasion, Ukraine has become a fast feedback live fire test range in which arms manufacturers, governments, venture capitalists, frontline units and coders and engineers from around the West collaborate to produce weapons that automate parts of the conventional military kill chain. Equipped with onboard proprietary software trained on large data sets and often run on off-the-shelf microcomputers like Raspberry Pi, drones with autonomous capabilities are now part of the war's bloody and destructive routine. In repeated visits to arms manufacturers, test ranges and frontline units over 18 months, I observed their development firsthand. Functions now performed autonomously include pilotless takeoff or hovering, geolocation, navigation of areas of attack, as well as target recognition, tracking, and pursuit, up to and including terminal strike, the lethal endpoint of the journey. Software designers have also networked multiple drones into a shared app that allows for flight control to be passed between human pilots or for drones to be organized into tightly sequenced attacks, a step toward computer-managed swarms. Weapons with these capabilities are in the hands of ground brigades as well as air defense, intelligence, and deep strike units. Drones under full human control remain far more abundant than their semi-autonomous siblings. They cause most battlefield wounds, but unmanned weapons are crossing into a new frontier. And while no publicly known drone in the war automates all steps of a combat mission into a single weapon, some designers have put sequential steps under the control of artificial intelligence. Quote, "Any tactical equation that has a person in it could have AI," said the founder of X-Drone, a Ukrainian company that has trained software for drones to hunt for and identify a stationary target like an oil storage tank and then hit it without a pilot at the controls. The founder asked that his name be withheld for security reasons. The Kremlin's forces are also adopting AI-enhanced weapons, according to examinations of downed Russian drones by Conflict Armament Research, a private arms investigation firm. With both sides investing, Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine's first deputy prime minister, and now indeed a defense minister, said AI-powered drones are at the center of a new arms race. Ukraine's defenders must field them in large numbers quickly, he said, or risk defeat. Quote, "We are trying to stimulate development of every stage of autonomy," he said. "We need to develop and buy more autonomous drones." Later, it says the captain, so talking about this one example, and other technicians working with AI-enhanced weapons said they tend to be brittle, limited in function, and less accurate than weapons under skilled human control. Many have a short battery life and brief flight times. Autonomous weapons with sustained endurance, high flexibility, and ability to discern, identify, rank, and pursue multiple targets, categories of targets independent of human action, have yet to appear, and they would require, the captain said, a waterfall of money, plus much imagination and time. Quote, "It's like the staircase at the Empire State Building," he said. "That's how many steps there are, and we are inside the building, but only on the first floor." As the safeguard against AI-powered weapons slipping the leash, humanitarians and many technologists have long advocated keeping humans in the loop, shorthand for preventing weapons from making homicidal decisions alone. By this thinking, a trained human must assess and approve all targets, as Lipa and Boba did, ideally with the power to abort an individual strike and kill switch to shut an entire system down. Strong guardrails, the argument goes, are necessary for accountability, compliance with laws of armed conflict, legitimacy around military action, and ultimately for human security. Schmidt has emphasized the necessity of human oversight, but at the end of a flight, some semi-autonomous weapons in Ukraine can already identify targets without human involvement, and many Ukrainian-made systems with human override are inexpensive and could be copied and modified by talented coders anywhere. Some of those designing AI-enhanced weapons who consider their development necessary for Ukraine's defense confess to unease about the technology that they themselves conjure to form. Quote, "I think we created the monster," said Nazar Bigun, a young physicist writing terminal attack software, "and I'm not sure where it's going to go." Okay, so lots more discussion of all of this. And then we go on to get, actually, let's go into this. So Underdog, which is another type of drone, began with tests on stationary objects, but after repeated updates, its software chased moving quarry. Range extended too. Early modules allowed 400 meters of terminal attack. By summer 2025, the fifth version of Norda's software, Pixel Lock, reached 2,000 meters, about 1.25 miles. By then, the modules had been distributed to collaborating FPV teams at the front. Quote, "We have some very good feedback," Begun said. A company bulletin board lists early hits, among them Russian artillery pieces, trucks, mobile radar units, and a tank. A test pilot, Janusz, a Polish citizen who had volunteered as a combat medic in Ukraine before joining the company, sat in the van wearing goggles and holding a handheld radio controller. Once the SUV drove away, he commanded an unarmed FPV drone through liftoff. "I'm flying," he said over the radio. The video feed showed golden fields and green windbreaks overlaid with dirt roads. The drone climbed to about 200 feet. Its camera revealed the black SUV less than a mile away. On screen, Janusz slipped a square-shaped white cursor over the image of the vehicle. A pop-up window appeared in the upper left corner containing a stabilized close-up of the SUV. With his left hand, Janusz selected Pixel Lock. The word engage appeared within a red banner on screen. Thin black crosshairs settled on the center of the SUV. Janusz lifted his hands from the controller. From the altitude of about 215 feet, the drone entered a slow dive. Within seconds, it had flown almost to the moving SUV's windshield. Janusz switched back to human piloting and banked the quadcopter away, sparing the vehicle damage from impact. At his command, the drone climbed, spun around and resumed pursuit, this time from more than 500 feet up. Its prey, and then he kind of does it again, it accelerates. I'm just going to quickly summarize this. And he once more overrode the software and banked it just away just in time. The quadcopter buzzed so closely that you could pick up the sound of the vehicle. He swung the drone around, showing the van he sat in. The cursor briefly presented the possibility of Pixel Lock on himself. Janos chuckled and steered the weapon away back towards the SUV. The driver's voice cackled over the radio. We will right now make a turn. So this is a training exercise. For the next half hour, the driver's maneuvers made no difference. No matter what he did to drive that van, the drone, once it was pixel locked, closed the distance autonomously, harassing the moving vehicle with the tenacity of an obsessed bird. Compared with conditions common in war, the field exercise was simple. Ground speeds are slow. Flights are by daylight. No power lines. No tree branches to block the way. The drone maintained a constant line of sight with the SUV, and the software had to lock on a lone vehicle, not on a target weaving through traffic or passing parked cars. But with more training and computational power, the software could be improved to discern and prioritize military targets based on replacement cost or degree of menace, or fine-tuned to strike armored vehicles in vulnerable places like exhaust grates or where turrets meet hulls. It might be trained to hunt almost anything at all: a bus, a parked aircraft, a lectern where a speaker is addressing an audience, a step-down electrical transformer distributing power to a grid, so on and so forth. And then we get on to talks about swarming. So not long after Janos's terminal attack flights, technicians from another Ukrainian company, Sign Engineering, gathered near a rural village to train drone pilots on its entrance to the swarm tech field called PASIKA, the Ukrainian word for apiary. The heart of PASIKA's hardware is its radio modems, small frequency hopping transceivers that act as beacons for flying drones. In flight, each quadcopter's altitude and locations update several times a second by measuring the differences in arrival times of radio signals from several known positions. PASIKA software also provides automated flight control. At its current stage of development, a sole pilot can manage dozens of drones through autonomous launch, navigation, and hovering, a pre-attack phase during which massed drones loiter pending instructions. We've seen that. I don't know if they use that kind of software, but the drones around Odessa that hang around the Black Sea waiting to make a critical mass, and then they all attack at once, although I think that would be individually controlled drones doing that. But anyway, via the app, pilots took turns ordering drones to launch and navigate to a point on the map. Unaided by human hand, quadcopters rose in the air and sped off over the countryside to loiter together about a mile away. Tablet screens revealed their progress, a video feed from each quadcopter showing rolling cropland below. The pilots kept their hands off the controls. A rusty tractor puttered past. For a final exercise, a pilot with the call sign Kara directed her team to gather 2 drones autonomously over the opposite field. Another team flew 3 more. Once the drones reached their loitering point, Kara said pilots could take control and fly them manually towards to practice a massed attack. PASIKA also allows them on the app to exchange control of individual drones among themselves. In this way, any pilot could use them to attack across a short distance with brief intervals between strikes. The concept could be extended further. So in other words, you've got all these drones, but you can have any pilot controlling any of them, and you can switch around control of the drones. Concept could be extended further with PASIKA or a similar system. Quadcopters stockpiled in boxes near a front could be commanded by a sole operator, whether AI or human, creating a dense swarm of drones to face ground attacks without delay. So on and so forth. I mean, this is a massive article. I've left out most of this, and I'd only got halfway through the article. So you can see, loads more to this article. I'm going to join it near the end here for the final part. Sorry, it's been long. But we're going to go back to the Bumblebee drone. Bumblebee's combat trials began with multiple brigades last winter. One test pilot who flew the drone near Kupiansk in December 24 said his team put the new quadcopters through progressively harder tests against Russian positions and vehicles, with the manufacturer's engineers on call for technical assistance. Quote, during this whole time, the product constantly improved, the pilot said. We constantly provided the developers with feedback. What works, what really does not work, which features are useful and which are not. As with most AI products, more data can lead to smarter software. During Bumblebee's quiet rollout, mission data from combat flights was logged and analyzed. Several pilots said developers then pushed software updates to brigades, and drone teams could download that remotely. On one early attack hit the entrance to a root cellar where Russian soldiers sheltered. As Bumblebee evolved, pilots flew them further distances and against moving targets. In January 2025, an autonomous Bumblebee attack stopped a Russian logistics truck as it drove behind enemy lines, the test pilot said. Remember, this is a year ago now. In April, after more updates, Bumblebees flew autonomously against the Russian armored armored vehicle driving with a jammer. The vehicle was so covered with anti-drone protective measures that it resembled a porcupine. It absorbed the first strike and kept moving. A second Bumblebee hit and mobilized it. This amounted to a milestone. A vehicle with all the protective steps Russia could muster had been removed from action. Bumblebee's entrance to the war had been shrouded in secrecy, but with strikes like that, the hush could not last. Russia took note. Its soldiers outside Kupiansk and Kharkiv, where early Bumblebee sorties occurred, reported that these strange new drones seemed impervious to interference. They flew smoothly through jamming and kept racking up hits. The only sure way to stop them was to shoot them down. 2 days after the strike on the armored vehicle, the Center for Integrated Unmanned Solutions, a Russian drone manufacturing business outside Moscow, issued findings from its analysis of a downed Bumblebee recovered near the front. It nicknamed the quadcopter Marsianin, Russian for Martian, based on the assumption that the prototypes descended from NASA's Ingenuity program, which developed a small autonomous helicopter that flew on Mars. The report's author declared that Ukraine had fielded an AI-enhanced drone capable of, quote, operating in total radio silence, while flying complex routes and maneuvers, quote, completely independent of navigation systems or even a human pilot. The following month, the Novorossiya Assistance Coordination Center, a Russian ultra-nationalist organization that provides training and equipment to Russian soldiers, published a second analysis, a 49-page report loaded with warnings. Through open source sleuthing, its author had found a photo of a Bumblebee posted by a Reddit user who in late 2024 obtained a broken specimen from garbage discarded at a Michigan National Guard facility. With that evidence, I mean, goodness, this shows a bit of espionage here, doesn't it? They've obtained a broken specimen of one of these drones from a garbage can discarded, or garbage discarded at the Michigan National Guard facility. So you've got Russians in Michigan getting hold of a drone that had been worked on by Americans. With that evidence, the author, Alexander Lyubimov, who organizes combat drone exhibitions in Russia, echoed the first analyst's suspicion that the Bumblebee had some connection to the United States. No shit, Sherlock. He noted that it poses a serious threat, he said, and asserted accurately that its current use does not yet reveal its full capabilities. It is most likely of a combat testing nature. Nonetheless, he added, there are no effective countermeasures against it, and none are expected in the near future. The Bumblebee's resistance to jamming, according to a sales pamphlet in limited circulation in Ukraine, was tied in part to redundant comms, radio wave frequency hopping, and navigation by visual inertial odometry, technical solutions to signal jamming. But what made the weapon remarkable was not any one autonomous feature. It was a convergence of several. According to the pamphlet, which claimed an over 70% direct hit rate via autonomous terminal guidance. 70% hit rate, that's better, if I'm correct in thinking, than human. I remember earlier in the war, one stat I read was a 17% hit rate. I think it's improved vastly since then, and Magyar's birds have improved their hit rates quite remarkably. But 70% direct hit rate via autonomous terminal guidance is pretty impressive. Schmidt's quadcopters are also capable of autonomous target recognition by overlaying bright green squares, and we've seen some of these. I've shown you some video footage of this on items of interest. Appearing in video feeds, pilots said Bumblebee software highlights potential targets, including foot soldiers, bunkers, vehicles, and other aerial drones, often before human pilots can spot them. The combination of features, they said, result in an autonomous attack capability more robust and reliable than others available to date. Bumblebees can also be controlled over the internet, which Lipa did in the strike in Borisivka. This keeps pilots away from the front and from many weapons that might counterattack. I mean, that's a huge capability. In theory, as long as Bumblebee's ground station maintains a stable Wi-Fi or broadband connection, a pilot can operate it from almost anywhere. I mean, is this basically what happened with Operation Spiderweb? A capability demonstrated this past summer when Schmidt visited Kyiv and observed the Katia team flying a Bumblebee released by a ground crew outside Kharkiv. So they're flying it from Kyiv. According to a review of footage, the people familiar with the mission, the drone passed over the lines and hit a four-wheel drive Russian military van known as a Bukanka, roughly 300 miles away. And then I said that's the final, but this is the very final bit. Ukrainian pilots and officers say Schmidt's products have shown more promise than most, though reviews for Bumblebee have not been universally glowing. The weapon has no night cameras, limited flights in daytime. Lyubimov, the Russian technical analyst, described the drone as inadequately weather resistant. Quote, the design exhibits many childhood flaws, he wrote, but Schmidt's technicians are available on the Signal app and responsive to suggestions, said Serhiy, a Bumblebee combat pilot and Khatyr's chief technical consultant. The first Bumblebees were difficult to operate, but through cycles of feedback and updates, they became better. In the beginning, it didn't fly without a professional pilot, he said. Now it can fly with a newbie. So he said he had tested 15 semi-autonomous terminal attack drones from different manufacturers, and the Bumblebee was the best. A new generation of Bumblebees is in the works, he added, with a stronger airframe and night optics. Hardware upgrades would be welcome, but the captain, who integrates new tech into Khatyr's operations, said hardware was not the secret ingredient behind Bumblebee's performance. It is, and this is unsurprising since this is obviously a guy that was behind Google, it is the firmware and the flight software, BQ ground control, that separates the drone from others. Quote, Eric Schmidt made a very innovative drone, he said, adding that Bumblebee is one of the only drones in Ukraine that is, quote, ready out of the box. Teams simply add an explosive charge and begin work. In a coordinated kamikaze attack, he said 3 Bumblebees and a standard FPV drone destroyed a 152mm howitzer inside Russia that was protected under a bunker roofed with logs. The first Bumblebee dove onto camouflage netting and set it on fire. The second breached the roof, and then the standard FPV plunged inside, and the final Bumblebee hovered overhead and scattered 10 small anti-personnel landmines around the site. The strikes were timed 2 minutes or less apart. Khatyr has repeated the tactic. Quote, there have been many similar attacks, he said. We wonder why there are so many artillery losses on a daily basis, right? If they're just doing this systematically across the front line, and we're not really knowing what's going on here, this could be huge, right? Bumblebees are so valuable, he added, that teams flying them are assigned only to important missions, principally hunts behind Russian lines for artillery and logistics vehicles, and to carry out relay transmitters that extend the other drones, so they carry those. Other units deliver packets of blood to bunkers that medics use to stabilize wounded soldiers awaiting evacuation, an officer supervising strike drone teams said. And then the Bumblebees require a human to designate targets before an attack. And the opinion here is, my opinion is that we need to leave the final judgment to the human being. Anyway, there you go. And there's way more. And this is a massive, it's honestly one of the biggest articles I've read on the war in Ukraine. But it makes reference later in the article. The state of Western military readiness today galvanizes Deborah Fairlam, a founding partner of Green Flag Ventures, a Delaware-registered venture capital fund investing in Ukraine defense tech startups. I met her in a bar in Kyiv. Right, she is drumming up like venture capitalist funding for tech startups and weaponry startups in Ukraine. She's doing a marvelous job, and so it's really great to see her referred to quite a lot in this article. Anyway, that's that. There's a lot of me talking in that article, but it gives you a sense of what's going on in the world of AI with these, particularly these Bumblebee drones from Schmidt and his startup there. The Ukrainians now use homemade unmanned ground vehicles such as a Skylab to do all sorts of things. I've been reporting on how the DevDroid 12.7mm drone has been used to shoot down Russian soldiers, whilst also taking a Russian captive back to Ukrainian HQ. Capable of transporting up to 200 kilograms of cargo over a distance of 2.5 kilometers, this particular drone, the Skylab, facilitates the delivery of ammunition, provisions, and medicines to the front line. They can be used to evacuate wounded from the battlefield. Not a huge drone, but obviously does a good job there. So it's the Skylab Serco S1, and it's equipped with thermal imaging camera, laser rangefinder, and a standard camera, which together provide reconnaissance of positions. And it's a pretty flexible platform, further increased by the ability to quickly add compatible modules, encrypted comms and control and video transmission, four-wheel electric drive with energy regeneration modes, and Serco S1 is currently in mass production. So loads of stuff being developed at the moment. Here is the DevDroid's slightly different one. This is the Droid NW40 UGV, similar to the one I was talking about, the 12.7. It's equipped with a 40mm projected grenade launcher and has multiple communication systems, including Starlink, LTE, and mesh radio. And that's on top of this is the Droid Raw 12.7. So yeah, they have I think different versions of these quite similar drones. Obviously there with a Browning M2 12.7mm machine gun, but you got in the one above a projected grenade launcher. So these are replacing humans, and necessarily so, because humans are in short supply for Ukraine. And you're going to see more and more UGVs get used on the front lines in Ukraine. Ukraine is also building new interception lines against Shahed drones, according to Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief. The focus is on boosting interceptor drones, radar systems, and trained crews. Air defense drone units are being formed away from cities with support from army, aviation, and international partners. A lot of work going into these interceptor drones that are being used more and more to take out Shaheds. Europe has found a way to shop is the last post in this segment, and Ukraine got a seat at the checkout. SAFE is the EU's 150 billion euro loan instrument for defense. So European nations have the ability to buy into European defense products, or buy European defense products to beef up their own defense and capabilities, and they've got preferential kind of financial assistance to do this, access to these loans. 15 EU countries plan to tap it while buying Ukrainian-made weapons. So Ukraine is now able to be part of this whole project so that European nations can buy Ukrainian weapons, with Ukrainian components being seen as, quote, European content. So that's good news for Ukraine. Right. The final section is on Russia. Sorry, I've kept you an awful long time here, and you've been very, very patient. So let's see what some of you guys have to say in the comments. Give myself a bit of a break. Julian Rossiter says UK MOD has a Project Nightfall ballistic missile scheduled for test firings early this year. 600-kilometer range with a 200 to 300 kilogram warhead, and costs only 500,000. I think, does a Storm Shadow cost about 2.2 million? I don't know if that's dollars or pounds, but if it's pounds, then obviously this ballistic missile rates at less than a quarter of the price. So that's obviously very, very attractive there, and that's added to their break stop cruise missile that they're producing. F-Oink, thanks Julian. F-Oink, occupying Greenland would enable a partial blockade of Canada. Well, yeah, that's a good point as well. F-Oink, Hungarian support there. Thank you, mate. Ms. Paula Thomas says, Ukraine is now becoming a value partner in technology exchange. There will be various EU and UK companies keen to partner with Ukrainian defense firms. Yes. What I hope, I mean, it's not that I want to be anti-American here, but I hope that the United States isn't just extracting from Ukraine all of this really important knowledge and expertise, and not giving Ukraine stuff back in the whole kind of Trumpian, Biden spent 350 billion, we're not going to spend a penny, we're just going to make money off you guys. But I hope they're not exploiting Ukraine in a way that, all nations will be, that are helping Ukraine, will be looking to gain advantage from doing so. But at the moment you got Britain and the EU and Norway, all these nations, and Canada and Japan at the moment as well, giving significant assistance to Ukraine, and you would hope that would allow those nations to get more of a reward for so doing, right, in terms of that technology exchange. Thank you for that, Paula. Richard Bennett, thank you very much for your support, mate. Always a pleasure to have you on board with 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Hutch says, I really think Russia screwed the pooch. They gambled with drawing out the war and peace talks. I think 2026 is going to bite them hard with the delays. I think they missed their best bet on getting the most from negotiations. I think you might be right, but I keep having to check myself for being too optimistic and too hopey-copey. But that's my general opinion, is that Ukraine, I think, has played the long game. I mean, it's been tough. It's been really bloody tough, but they have done a remarkable job at keeping the Russians at bay, and at the same time are treating the Russians at tremendous levels in terms of materiel and personnel. And so, you know, it could be that 2026 is a big year for them. It's all going to come down to the scale of those missiles and drones, the production. But hopefully this, I mean, if you have nights like last night was a fairly good night for Ukraine, where you had an ammunition storage base taken out. You had oil depot and I don't know if a refinery, certainly a couple of oil infrastructural places here, and then, you know, substations and here, and a whole bunch of stuff hit last night. And if you just have that every single night, 7 days a week, without let up, Russia's going to be in trouble, honestly. Mitch Mazarol, thanks. Hey, good to see you, Mitch. Not that I can see you, but you know what I mean. The new Canadian focus on broader trade relationships is just a rational response to an irrational foreign policy. Correct, of course. Bound to irk Trump and exacerbate his tariff blackmail, notwithstanding explicit or implied threats. I mean, there is going to be a sense that if Canada are able to thrive on the back of being slapped with tariffs, that is going to wind up POTUS. If Canada just goes, meh, well, you tried, but we've got closer mates. We're now really good buddies with Europe, and it turns out, screw you guys. I don't know. That could really annoy the Americans there. But you know, what are you going to do apart from, you know, invade and whatnot? Thanks, Mitch. Yes. So we're going to now go to a short section on Russia. Thankfully short, you'll be happy to know. Europe found a way to next one. Belarus has transferred at least 31 wagons of military equipment from Belarus directly to Russia. The wagons were sent from Borisov Station to Russia's 1,311th Central Tank Reserve Base, while Siberia received 31 platforms of air defense equipment. So it looks like Belarus is really helping out Russia at the moment. And I guess that's a sign of Russian desperation. They are wanting anything from anyone at all times. Here we have Shahed, and I've shown you this previously. Shahed adaptation. It can blind anti-aircraft drones and aircraft. The enemy equips its strike drones with infrared searchlights. Serhiy Flash said that he had seen this for the first time and added that the enemy continues to work on countermeasures. So there you can see an infrared blinding device on the back of a Shahed to stop any countermeasures, ideally, as they would see it, from getting too close. And talking about Shahed adaptation, and I talked about this, I think, yesterday, a closer look at the Russian Shahed Garand type long-range drone equipped with an Igla-S MANPAD. This is a man-portable air defense system. It's very thin-looking air surface-to-air kind of missile system that would be used from someone's shoulder. They've put that on top of a Shahed drone, and this will be to ward off, deter, or take down any Ukrainian either intercept or even helicopter or jet that might be looking to take out their Shahed. Now, I don't know if the Igla, does it fire, is it pointing backwards? I think that is pointing backwards, isn't it? So it would fire that off backwards at a following, yeah, there you go, there's an image there. So that's pointing backwards, I think, but it might not be, because when you hold it on the shoulder, actually it's a short bit. No, that's probably pointing out to the front. It's kind of a weird place to have it. You think that it'd be trying to shoot down something. Usually all the interceptions I've seen have been trying to take out the Shahed from behind. So it'd be odd if that's a forward pointing MANPAD, but I don't know, maybe you know more than me there. Right, what else do we have? So what took place this morning, or last night really, is that NEA in Kostroma region, the 100th GRAU Arsenal was hit, and there were quite a number of explosions there. So I would have thought some secondary explosions going off. I've included that here because if Ukraine can start causing some real issues for these, and they know where a lot of these places are. Now, the problem is a lot of them are kind of defended by or protected. A lot of these little, not warehouses, but little little bunker things are protected by berms and embankments and whatnot. And to really have an effect, you've got to hit each individual one. Sometimes, like previously, when things have been stored outside and badly, you've had the whole place going up. So we've seen a couple of catastrophic explosions at particular arsenals, but I'm pretty sure the Russians will now be very careful about, or a lot more careful about, how they store their equipment. And I don't know whether you're going to get another fundamental disassembly of these storage facilities, but I still think it's worth absolutely hammering these, because without ammunition, the Russians are going to struggle to do what they want against the Ukrainians there. But good news from last night. Now, the Russians have patented an anti-FPV defense system called the Aduvanchik, the Dandelion. The protection consists of a flexible reinforced rods branching out into several tiers. A similar system is being installed on civilian cars. So we've seen a whole bunch of these, haven't we? These porcupine tanks, as they're often called, but actually probably quite effective. And I don't know how easy they are to create these, but they're probably not too expensive. And there you go. My goodness, there's one porcupine tank. Evidently, these things do work to a degree, and they cause the attackers to pour in loads more resources. I saw a tank, I showed you a video, I can't remember, was it 2 months ago, of one of these sorts of tanks. It was either a turtle, I think it was a turtle tank rather than a porcupine tank, but it took at least 25 hits to fully immobilize the tank. So instead of one drone taking out, it's 25 drones now. And so they really can necessitate the Ukrainians in this case to expend an awful lot of time and energy and resources to take them out. So yeah, these things might look ridiculous, but they are functionally beneficial for, in this case, the Russians. Okay, that's enough from me. Goodness me, that's a lot of talking. It was a bumper one today. I do appreciate you being here. It's almost 2 hours for a bloody military aid video. It is what it is, but thank you for your patience, and thank you very much for your support of the channel. Kevin, Pirate, Karen, Julian, F Oink, Paula, Mitch, Hutch, all sorts. You're all really kind. Thank you. And back to the live chat. I hope you have had, I've been on my own, so I hope you have had a lively live chat, and I do apologize for not having seen many of your wonderfully insightful comments, as I'm sure they are. Having asked you several times what your opinions on something are, I am unable to actually read them. So there you go. Yeah, this is something that worries me, Vigo. The USA is lifting a lot of sanctions imposed on Belarus, their way of not overtly supporting Russia. Yeah, definitely. Just really, really sucks that. Yes. Just trying to see if there's anything more. Right, I think that'll do. I better go and see my boys, as they've got back and no doubt are causing trouble around the house. I do. Yes, I do appreciate all of you. So I'm still trying to read what you're doing. You're all chatting away, and that's good stuff. So thanks, Vigo, and thanks all of you. We've been blessed and cursed by listening and seeing you. I know it is a problem. I'll try and have a facial transplant and a vocal transplant at some point this year. But in the meantime, you just got me. Take care, everybody. Really appreciate it. And Slava Ukraini. And let's hope that this year really is what I hope it will be, which is a year of Ukraine ramping up production and usage of weapons that they can use from a distance so they don't lose their own soldiers in so doing. Toodle pips.